All children can encounter bruising and injuries. It's part of childhood. But we know that certain bruises and certain injuries can be a cause for concern. And so it's our role as school staff to be alert to certain bruises and certain injuries that perhaps require particular safeguarding response. Sadly, many children that we work with in schools will experience abuse, neglect, and exploitation, and physical injuries to the body can be an indicator of this. So schools need to be alert, they need to be aware, and we need to be curious about bruises and injuries that children have. Data would suggest that disabled children are 3.5 times more likely to experience abuse. We know that physical injuries and bruising can be an indicator that a child is being abused, exploited, or neglected, and so we need to be really alert to those on disabled children, especially when we consider that some disabled children may find it challenging to communicate to us how they have received a bruise or an injury. And for many, they may not understand what has happened to be able to recount that to staff. So we need to be even more alert to the bruises and injuries that a child has and curious about how they may have come to be. Additional considerations for children who have various impairments are that sometimes they're more prone to bruising and injuries because of their developmental age. So we may have some children who chronologically are 10, 11 years old, but happen to be functioning at the age of a 3, 4-year-old, and therefore they might be climbing on furniture and getting more bruises as a result of that behaviour. We may have children who are taking certain medications that makes them more likely to receive bruising. So we need to understand the context around disabled children in order to be able to understand how a bruise or an injury has been caused and decide how to respond to that effectively. So we can all get bruises and injuries from time to time, but there are particular areas of the body where we would be more concerned to see a bruise or an injury. So if we have knocks, if we have falls, then we're more likely to see bruises and injuries on our bony bits of our body. So our knees, our shoulders, our elbows, our chin, if we go down onto the floor. So those are areas that are prone to accidental injuries and bruising. The areas of the body that warrant more concern are those softer tissue areas. So for example, the face, the back, the abdomen, the buttocks, the inner thigh. Those are areas where we don't typically knock ourselves or bruise or get injuries when we fall over. So when we see bruises and injuries in those particular areas, then of course we need to be extra curious as to how they've been caused. If we do notice a bruise or an injury on an area of a child's body which is known to be an area for accidental harm, it doesn't mean we discredit it and take no notice of it at all. Of course, injuries and bruising in those types of areas could still be as a result of harm being caused to a child. The other thing to consider, especially with children who have SEND, is perhaps numerous injuries in areas that are known for accidental harm could indicate things, for example, like a lack of supervision at home, that we would then need to respond to and work with parents to try and overcome. So it's not just the location of the bruise or the injury that we need to pay attention to. There are other factors to consider too. For example, how big is the bruise or injury? So what size is it? Another thing to consider is what shape is the bruise? Now, when you get a bruise from a knock, a fall, a bump, that is usually an irregular shape. But if we see bruising that has particular shapes, perhaps a linear line or shapes that might be look like digit marks, then of course those are things that we need to pay attention to and we need to robustly record and evidence. We also need to think about, are there patterns? So are there patterns in the marks, the bruises, the injuries that a child has? So that might be patterns of similar bruises and injuries on the same part of a body, or it could be patterns of bruising and injury over a period of time. All of that contextual information is absolutely key. We should never look at a bruise or an injury in complete isolation. We need to take into account what else we can see on that child and also other contextual factors. So when we notice a bruise or an injury on a child, there are other things that we would want to consider to help us determine how to respond effectively to that situation. So one of the first things is, has the child disclosed, or are there any indicators from the child themselves that something has gone on or something is not okay for them? So have they verbally told us, or are there non-verbal signs that something is not okay in that child's life? Could it be a behavioural change? Could it be an emotional change that we need to take account of? Other factors are the age of the child. So notably, as we grow older in chronological age, as babies, we don't have a lot of bruises and injuries, but as we reach toddlerhood, we get lots of them because of our changes in mobility. So we would more likely see bruises and injuries in toddler age children. And then as we progress into primary age, we typically see bruises and injuries, and then that peters off into secondary school age children. So the age of the child is important. The developmental age of the child is important. So if we have a child who's functioning at a much lower developmental age, then it may be that they are embarking in much more boisterous play. It might be that they do a lot of climbing. Those things might account for the bruise and the injury that we're witnessing. Other things to think about are family context. So do we know anything about the family which might raise alarm bells? So has there been a history of domestic abuse, for example, within the family, which would cause us concern if we're then noticing new unexplained injuries on a child? We should think about the behaviour of the child. So is this a child who is known for behaviour that challenges staff? Have we witnessed them getting involved in behaviours with other children in the school, or are we aware of any disputes with their siblings at home? Is this a child where we have some history, some known behaviour around self-injurious behaviour? And so could that account for the injury or the bruise that we're seeing? So as always with safeguarding, it's not just about what we're seeing, it's about what we're hearing, what we know about the child, and also looking at our chronologies to understand, is there a pattern in anything that we're seeing now? So has there been a pattern of these bruises appearing over a period of time? So in a school situation, we should never be expected to take or keep any photos of an injury or a bruise of a child. The police may want to do so as part of their evidence gathering, or a photo might be taken as part of a child protection medical examination. But in a school context, we shouldn't be taking photos of any injuries or bruising. By doing so, queries are raised about the security of any photo taken and who can access that photograph, being able to identify the child in the photograph, also concerns around the intimacy of taking photos that show particular areas of the body. So no, we should never be taking any photos of injuries or bruising. Instead, what we should be doing is using accurate depictions on body maps to record the bruising and the injuries that we are noticing. When we notice a bruise or an injury on a child, we will need to follow our safeguarding procedures in school. And one part of that process will be to make sure that we've got a record of the bruise or the injury that we've noticed. So to do that, we will be using our systems for recording, usually our electronic systems, and that will entail completing a body map. And you should be using the body map prescribed by your local Safeguarding Children's Partnership. When you complete that body map, if you are doing it by hand, then make sure you use a black pen to do it so that that can be used if needed as evidence. Please also make sure that you are very accurate about how you show the bruise or the injury on the body map. So for example, just circling a limb would not be good enough. You need to be very specific about where that bruise or that injury is. And then in the description of your record, you want to include things like the size of the bruise or the injury. Now, it might not be possible for you to very accurately say how many centimetres or inches that bruise or injury is, but what you might want to do is, for example, compare it to the size of something very familiar, such as a coin. So a bruise is the size of a 50p piece. You also want to include things like the shape of the bruise or the injury, and also a description of the colour. We know that colour doesn't always accurately depict the age of the bruise or the injury, but using the colour in your description is helpful nonetheless. Other things to include is the part of the body that's injured swollen? Is there any discoloration? Is it looking out of sorts? So is there any disfigurement? Is it hot to touch? Is the child showing any pain or discomfort? So all of those things can be captured in the description of the bruise and the injury, and will help then to decide how to treat the bruise or the injury, and also how to respond and who to refer to. Within our safeguarding practice, it is always best to talk to parents about the concerns that we have over a child's safety or well-being, because we need to work with parents to improve outcomes for children. However, the exceptions to that are if we think that by talking to parents and carers, it increases the risk of further harm to a child. If you are ever in doubt about whether you should be speaking to a parent or carer about a concern such as an unexplained injury or bruise, then do seek the input and the support from your local children's services team, who will be able to advise on whether it's appropriate to speak to the parents or carers about that concern. So for further support, please do follow your internal safeguarding procedures at your school. Also do have a look at your local Safeguarding Children's Partnership and the multi-agency safeguarding procedures that they have, because very often they will contain sections on responding to bruising and injuries. And thirdly, the NSPCC have a useful document about bruising and injuries that can help to inform your practice and also your policies in school.